Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior AP English, and our objective now this hour is to finish up with several of the classic British romantic poems and of course their authors. We're going to begin with Coleridge's Kubla Khan on 825, and I want to make a quick observation about the different ways to read these poems of Coleridge, especially Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan. I think I've already gestured towards this once, but I want to recapitulate just to make sure that you're all feeling comfortable with what it is that you're doing. If you pick up Kubla Khan and you look at 2a for messages or themes, you are going to be frustrated. But let's point out that there's two different kinds of poems that we're looking at when we look at Rime of the Ancient Mariner versus Kubla Khan. Rime of the Ancient Mariner is clearly a poem that we would call a propedeutic. It is didactic, it's instructional, it's supposed to teach you something. By the end of the poem, as we've already kind of said in other lectures, you're supposed to have some sense of a new enlightenment, a new understanding of the world or whatever. There's a second kind of poem that in poetics we often will call an expressionist kind of approach to poetry. And this one is to try to elicit some kind of emotional rendering or mood, right, when you read the poem. Another way to say this is it's experiential. While you're reading the poem, you're simply experiencing something. A lot of times it's going to be the play of language. Kubla Khan certainly is one of these kinds of poems. Now, there is no doubt that you have definite movement in this poem, from beginning with Xanadu and ending with the word paradise. Notice the cyclical nature of this poem. We begin in this mythic place called Xanadu, and we end with the final word paradise. But in between, Kubla Khan, the great and mighty leader, is going to play a game at 3a that will as well be the same game of Ozymandias. That's a poem that we will look at here coming in the next few days. All right. What is this movement for Kubla Khan in this poem? Can anyone identify it? First of all, he is, a great and mighty warrior. But then what? Did anyone see in the lines a movement that would express foreboding? Can you find a moment in this poem where there seems to be an uh-oh moment, like, uh-oh, I guess I have power, but maybe not forever? Do you find a single moment in this poem when these kinds of things happen for him? Notice on page 827, the 30th line. Ancestral voices that Kubla will hear from afar, prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. In other words, what's being said here, suggested here, about the future? Not good. Yeah, maybe not good, right? So there is a sense of a bit of foreboding. Maybe something bad is coming. The unhappy is the head that wears the crown, and all of that. Notice we finish the poem. That sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware. There is some sense maybe that the future is, there's a little bit of uncertainty, we might say, about the future. All right, let's move on now. I want to talk in more detail now about the poetry of Burns. Let's go to 766 now, if we could, please. You can kind of see that I'm moving back and forth in your book, and now we're going to talk about, in your hymnal, one of the very first of these Generation 1 poets, Robert Burns. We have two of the offerings of Burns as the greatest of the Scottish poets, and that's who we want to start with. We want to call him that, the greatest of the Scottish poets, and his influence is prodigious in poetics because of his experimentation, especially, we might say, with language. A professional reading of both of these poems will help us. But before we get there, I want to make a couple of observations so that we know what we're looking at. Burns likes to move from the simple to the complex. He is, in that regards, much like Blake, a poetic philosopher. He's going to begin with the most simple of real life situations, and this is going to qualify him obviously in the camp of the Romantics. He's going to begin, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. You can't get anything more silly or mundane than a rainbow. And yet by the end of the poem, that brief poem, Wordsworth will say, if I ever get to the point in my life where I don't enjoy rainbows, just kill me, put me out of my misery, I'm ready to die, which seems a fairly extreme position to take. Philosophically, he'll try to explain it by saying the child is father of the man. We're going to find the same game getting played with Burns. Two poems, two different situations. Let's talk about them. First of all, To a Mouse. Of course, a poem that Steinbeck will not only find intriguing, but he will use as the basis for a famous novel that I believe you read when you were a sophomore. Out in a field, plowing is happening. A little mouse's nest is turned upside down with the plow. And the poet speaker, probably Burns, identifies right away that he has destroyed the little animal's home. Okay? Now that's the situation. It's as simple as that. But the poem then will move to its philosophic moment, where Burns will identify in some ways with this mouse. And in a moment, he says, he can kind of relate to the mouse. In what way? In that the best laid plans of mice and men soon off to go awry. I'm obviously working in translation. His Scottish dialect we'll hear in the professional read in a moment. And that is to say, we as humans make these plans, not unlike our little mouse, who makes his little plan to make the the house that he's created so great, and then all of a sudden a twist of nasty fate comes along, and bam, and everything is changed, and your life is turned upside down. We could easily ask this question at 3B. Think about a moment when you thought everything was going one direction for you, and then all of a sudden some plow comes along, metaphorically speaking, and completely destroys your metaphoric plans or your house or whatever. And the only thing you can do is to just say, that's life. That's just the way it goes. Right about the moment that you think everything is going one way. Of course, athletes often will say this is, the way it happens with injuries. You never really plan for injuries, and they seem to come at the most inopportune of moments, right about the time when you really need to be able to perform. There goes the injury, and there it is. It's like there's no going back. There's no undoing it, much like the plow tearing up the mouse's little house. To a Louse. Well, I'll outline both of these and then we'll listen to them. To a Louse. This is really fascinating little poem. Burns is sitting at church, or the speaker of the poem is sitting at church. And on the woman's bonnet or hat, sitting in the row right in front of him, this woman who's very dressed, very proper, very pristine, very kind of high and mighty, she has some lice on her that he can see. He can see them, little tiny lice. And he begins to then immediately speak to these little lice. And he asks, again, we go from the simple to the philosophic. He asks a really intriguing question. We all kind of know what we look like when we look in the mirror. We know ourselves. What we look like when we look in the mirror. But have you ever wondered what other people see when they see you? Now, of course, if you're an 8th grader, you don't even know how to answer or even ask this question because there's no one else in the universe other than you, right? And therefore, what anybody else sees of you as an 8th grader, obviously they see exactly what you see because, well, you're the only one that matters, and therefore your opinion is the one that matters. But by the time you become older, you begin to have this insight. There's got to be people that look at you and completely see you different from the way you see yourself. If you could crawl inside of their brain and look out through their eyes at you, you would see what? You would think what? What would you think about yourself if you could see yourself not through your own eyes, which is the way you've seen yourself all your life, but through the eyes of other people, which is, of course, a completely impossible task, right? You can only see the world through your own eyes, right? I mean, literally. And yet, what the poet will ask us to imagine is, what would the world look like What would this woman sitting in front of me, who thinks she's so high and mighty, if she knew she had lice on her, what would she think about herself if she could see her as I see her? That is a very intriguing idea. Let's look at both of these poems, follow them. One of the reasons why I have you listen to professional reading of this poem is so that you can enjoy the language of Burns. You've got to be following along as you read these poems to really appreciate this language. Enjoy the Scottish dialect as well.
On turning her up in her nest with the plough, November 1785, Robert Burns.
What can you learn from examining the commonplace? In To a Mouse and To a Louse by Robert Burns, the speakers address creatures that are often overlooked or despised. Read along to discover the insights expressed in these poems.
Wee, sleeky, cowering, timorous beastie, oh, what panic's in thy breastie! Thou needna start away so hasty wi' bickering brattle. I would be laith to in and chase thee wi' murdering pattle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union, and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. I doubt na whyers, but thou may thee, what then? Poor beastie, thou mayn leave. A demon icker in a frave's a sma' request. I get a blessing with a leave and never miss it. Thy wee bit housie too in ruin. It silly was the winds are strewing, and nothing now to big a new of foggage green, and bleak December's winds ensuing baith snell and keen. Thou saw the fields laid bare and waste, and weary winter coming fast, and cosy here beneath the blast thou thought to dwell, till crash the cruel coulter passed out through thy cell. That wee bit heap of leaves and stibble has cost thee mony a weary nibble. Now thou's turned out for all thy trouble, but house or hald, to thaw the winter's sleety dribble and cranridge cold. But mousie, thou art no thy lane in proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, and lay us nought but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee, but och, I backward cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I cannot see, I guess and fear.
Look at the last line of this poem. Again, for those of you who are enjoying just the language, the rhythmic, melodic language of Burns's work. But look what he says at the very end. He says, he thinks about prospects drear, and he thinks forward, though he cannot see, and he tries to guess in fear. What is the point of this poem in regards to the future and our plans? And think about the human condition as being a condition where we make all these plans. We lie in bed at night thinking about what the future is going to be. We try to create in our mind some idea of the future. But this poem suggests what about all of those plans? I mean, we've been taught from the time we were really young, be disciplined, be organized, get a plan, use your master schedule, right? Know what you're doing, have your future. The guys who work the hardest are the ones who get the future goal. You know, hard work pays off. Build that little nest as strong as you can. And then along comes the plow. Oh, so much for all those plans. Does that mean no plans? How do you answer this observation? What is the best way to live for the future? Is it to plan? Is it not to plan? I mean, you'll remember that story that some of you were told when you were young about the two squirrels. One of them, he just works through the summertime, collecting all of his little nuts to put it inside of his tree so that when winter comes, he's prepared. And the other squirrel, he likes suntanning by the pool. He's got no interest in nut collections of any kind. Then winter hits, and the snow comes. And the little squirrel who has all of his nuts, he's in his warm little house eating away on his nuts when he hears that knock on his door. It's the other little squirrel out in the snow freezing to death. I need some nuts. I don't have any nuts. To which you will maybe recall the final line of the story is, sucks to be you. Obviously, that's not the language that we got told as kids. But right? Isn't that what, that's right? I mean, the guy, the squirrel inside says, no. No. You should have worked in your own time, and you should have stored up for your own nuts. I ain't giving you none of my nuts, because if I give you some of my nuts, I won't have enough to make it through the winter. Go somewhere else. And of course, we know the end of the story is the poor little squirrel in the snow. He gets jacked. Now, you were told this story when you were young for an obvious reason. I'm lecturing to AP students. Clearly, one or two of us took the advice. Right? Notice the bitter irony, though. If we start with the two squirrels story of Aesop's fables, we end with Burns's To a Mouse. Right. What they didn't tell you is that when he collected all of his little nuts in his little house, another tree got cut down, fell against his house, completely obliterated him and all of his nuts. It didn't matter that he had done all that work to prep with all those nuts. Master schedules only work until they don't. Now what are you going to do? That is an intriguing question. How do you go forward? Some of you will hear students right now saying to the question, what are you going to do after you graduate? And they literally will go, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I don't know. Like, are you going to go to college? I don't know. Dude, are you going to do anything? I don't know. What do I got to worry about what's going to happen June 1st for? It ain't June 1st yet. I'll worry about June 1st when June 1st gets here. And some of us will say, no, 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 that is not the way you live your life. If you wait until June 1 to do June 1, you may be a little bit shocked by what happens. You won't be prepared. How do you balance these two? Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. Do you work to collect all of your little nuts? Do you feather your little nest in the ground? Or do you say, in the end, it doesn't matter anyway. There's always the odd that there's going to be some kind of plow that comes along, just smashes whatever project it is I put together in the first place. Of course, some of you are saying, oh, so Steinbeck's novel, it really is about this line of mice and men. Think about how everything in that little novella is about planning. Kind of like Elitch. Planning, 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 planning. And every time there's a plan, it always gets smashed. Right? Disturbingly smashed. How do you make plans if you know the plow is coming? That is an intriguing question. How do you know what to do? How seriously do you take your plans for the future if you know there's a potential plow coming? All right, let's go to a louse now. We're ready to listen to this one. Again, what would it be like to see the world, not through your eyes, but to see yourself as others see you? Let's take a look at this one, see what that one's like.
This one's not be bad.
Well, louse. On seeing one on a lady's bonnet at church.
Great, great poem.
Robert Burns. Ha! Where you going, you crowling farley? Your impudence protects you surly. I cannot say, but you strunt rarely, or goes and lace. Though faith, I fear you dine but sparely on sick a place. You ugly, creeping, blasted oneer, detested, shunned by saint and sinner. How dare you set your foot upon her, say fine a lady? Go somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Swith, in some beggar's half-it squattle, there you may creep and sprawl and sprattle, with other kindred jumping cattle in shoals and nations. Where horn nor bane, ne'er dare unsettle your thick plantations. Now hide ye there, you're out of sight, below the factral, snug and tight. Now faith ye yet, you'll no be right till you've got on it, the very topmost towering height of Mrs. Bonnet. Ma sooth, right board you set your nose out as plump and grey as ony grosset. Oh, for some rank mercurial roset, or fell red smedum, I'd get you sick a hearty dosset, what dress your drodden. I wouldn't have been surprised to spy you on an old wife's flannin toy, or abling some bit daddy boy on's wild coat. But Mrs. Fine Lenardi, fie, how dare you do it? Oh, Jenny, dinna toss your head and set your beauties a bread. You little ken what cursed speed the blasty's making. Thy winks and finger ends I dread are notice taken. Oh, what some power the gifty gies to see ourselves as others see us. It would frae money a blunder free us and foolish notion. What airs in dress and gait would lay us, and even devotion.
Jot down what you find interesting about, what do you like, let me ask it that way, what do you like about the language of birds? Okay? Well, this is one of those great Scottish poets where rhythm is everything, right? Rhythm is everything. Some of you will say, I tried to read this poem, but there's no way I could capture the rhythmic language of the poem without hearing it first, all right? So I want to go back. We're going to listen to this one more time, and I want you to pay attention now to the rhythm. If I had to read this on my own, how would I read this poem so that I could understand it? Again, for those of you that aren't actually physically looking at a book, this is going to be hard to do. You need to actually be looking at the words themselves to see if you can follow along and see how you're supposed to read Burns. I say this especially because some of you will actually go online and look at more Burns poetry. After you learn how to read, it's fun to read. It's kind of almost like a puzzle of sorts, right?
To a louse, on seeing one on a lady's bonnet at church. Robert Burns. Ha! Where you going, you crowding furley? Your impudence protects you surly. I cannot say, but you strumped rarely, or gauze and lace. Though faith, I fear you dine but sparely on sick a place. You ugly, creeping, blasted oneer, detested, shunned by saint and sinner. How dare you set your foot upon her, say fine a lady? Gae somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Swith, in some beggar's half-it squattle, there you may creep and sprawl and sprattle, with other kindred jumping cattle in shoals and nations. Where horn nor bane, ne'er dare unsettle your thick plantations. Now hide ye there, you're out of sight, below the fackrel snug and tight. Now faith ye yet, you'll no be right till you've got on it, the very topmost towering height of Mrs. Bonnet. Ma sooth, right board you set your nose out as plump and grey as ony grosset. Oh, for some rank mercurial roset, or fell red smedum, I'd get you sick a hearty dosset, what dress your drodden. I wouldn't have been surprised to spy you on an old wife's flannin toy, or abling some bit daddy boy on's wild coat. But Mrs. Fine Lenardi, fie, how dare you do it? Oh, Jenny, dinna toss your head and set your beauties a bread. You little ken what cursed speed the blasty's making. Thy winks and finger ends I dread are notice taken. Oh, what some power the gifty gies to see ourselves as others see us. It would frae money a blunder free us and foolish notion. What airs in dress and gait would lay us, and even devotion.
The poem will finish with a really interesting philosophic question. What would it be like to live seeing ourselves the way others see us? It is a really interesting question, and I've had students that tried this. I have to tell you in advance, be careful. And one or two of you have pointed out already. I understand what you said the other day about how I'm spending more time enjoying the company of my pals on the weekends or whatever, having conversations or whatever. Now is a good time to ask this question to those who are you're closest to. Just to ask somebody who knows you really well, what do you really think of me? Like, when you look at me, what do you really think? I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear. I want you to tell me what you really think. There's two questions here. One, can other people really tell you that? I mean, Or are they forever going to be like, oh no, I don't want to hurt his or her feeling, I don't want to, you know. And then secondly, T.S. Eliot says in Four Quartets, humankind cannot bear very much reality. Can we hear it from those people? I mean, if we were to really ask somebody we really care, you know, we're close to, I need you to tell me exactly what you see when you see me. And they were to say, yeah, this is what I see for reals. And it is totally opposite of what you thought of yourself. Would you be angry? Oh yeah, well I can say some stuff about you. Or would you be more inclined to say, oh, okay, I guess I can't hear that. Why is it so hard to hear the truth? And what is it about the truth that troubles us in regards to the way people see us? Right? We prepare a face, T.S. Eliot says in Proof Rock, to meet the faces that we meet. There's that notion that every day we get ready to kind of play a role, a persona. Do you think it's ever possible that other people can really know who and what we really are? Or will we forever have to play this game of kind of pretending like we're something else? Or is that what we call true friends? True friends are people who know what we're really like. We know what they think of us, and it's still okay. Or can you have a relationship like that? Or is it too combatant? It's too nasty? What would that mean, to see yourself as other people can see us? Of course, this idea can take one step further. Let's talk about, you know, moral development as it, you know, works with Sarah Gilligan and other important, you know, philosophers. There's three ways of seeing the world. The eyes, we can say it this way, the eyes of moral sight. The first is what we would simply call the egocentric view, right? That is to say, the world is the way I see it. And I don't really care what anybody else thinks. Right? If I, for example, have an opinion, you should have the same opinion. Right? The world that matters is the world that I know about. Okay? It's my world. I see things the way I want to see it, the egocentric view. Of course, if you've spent any time around children, you know this is exactly how they see the world, right? For them, the world is the way it is for them. But at some point early on, other adults step in and say, no, just because you have this view does not mean that it is the correct moral view. This is the whole thing of the kid takes away the swing set from the other kid on the playground and the teacher says, what if you, this is that notion of taking the other place, and we move to the second view, and this is what we call the ethnocentric view. The ethnocentric view moves beyond the egocentric view, and it says, you have to have the view of the group. And we're familiar with this in middle school, right? Whatever the rest of the group says is the right thing to do, that's what I do as well. I don't want anybody bothering me, making fun of me, etc. I'm going to basically have the same view as the group. And of course, these groups can vary. They can be, of course, religious groups. They can be national groups, as in countries. They can be small clubs or whatever, right, or groups of people. The ethnocentric view moves beyond the egocentric view. But it is still, my tribe is the right tribe. My religion is the right religion. My nation is the right nation. It's always still ethnocentric. The third view. The third view is what we will call world-centric. And it's where Burns is taking us. To be able to see the world through not egocentric eyes or ethnocentric eyes, but to see it through world-centric eyes. If, for example, you had been born at a different time in a different place, you might have had different views, morally speaking. You might have held very strongly convicted views, but you would have had them about different things, simply by virtue of your birth, by virtue of who raised you, etc. Let's turn now to Lorelei. This is the last of our poems. This is the Henrik Heine poem. And we'll just listen to it real quick and make some final observations.
The Lorelei, Heinrich Heine.
The Lorelei by German poet Heinrich Heine was inspired by a legend about a woman who sings from a rock on the Rhine River. Read along to learn why the speaker of the poem is haunted by this legend.
I cannot explain the sadness that's fallen on my breast. An old fable haunts me and will not let me rest. The air grows cool in the twilight, and softly the Rhine flows on. The peak of a mountain sparkles beneath the setting sun. More lovely than a vision, a girl sits high up there. Her golden jewelry glistens. She combs her golden hair. With a comb of gold she combs it, and sings an evensong. The wonderful melody reaches a boat as it sails along. The boatman hears with an anguish more wild than was ever known. He's blind to the rocks around him. His eyes are for her alone. At last the waves devoured the boat and the boatman's cry. And this she did with her singing, the golden Lorelei.
Now, of course, you're familiar. Let's start at 3A real quickly. You're obviously familiar with the Song of the Sirens from the Odyssey. This poem plays an interesting game about responsibility for the failure of men. We can think about, at 3A, of course, any number of stories. We think of Pandora, don't we? We think of Milton's Eve. We can think of a number of times when bad things happen for men and women get blamed. In this poem, the word picture is a profound one. The guy is in his boat sailing, minding his own business, next to the rocks, when he looks up and sees this drop-dead gorgeous woman, this Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, sitting up on the rocks, combing her beautiful hair. And the next thing you know, he's wrecked his ship and he's dead. Now the obvious question is, who's to blame? Do you blame the beautiful woman who sits on the rocks combing her beautiful hair and singing? Obviously she is attractive to him. Or do you blame the guy for looking up? Who is to blame, by the way? What? It's clearly the guy. Yeah, it's clearly the guy. What?
We turn in like our packets out.